In this video, I'm going to talk to you about the 5 different ways that you can hold your CNC projects on your CNC router. idcwoodcraft.com. I'm Garrett Fromme, CEO of IDC Woodcraft, company that you get your CNC router bits from. In this video, we are going to talk about the 5 different ways to hold CNC projects on CNC routers, and we're going to discuss the pros and the cons of each. And we're going to start with the least common method of holding your project on a CNC router to the most common. So let's start with number 1. The first method we're going to talk about, and the least used method to hold a project on a CNC router, is a vise. Now, when it comes to using a vise on the CNC router, the first thing about vices is that they have to be fixed down to the machine. The good thing about a vise is your project is very secure in the vise when you clamp it down. However, that can actually be something that can be a problem because you can over tighten the vise onto your wood and actually deform the wood. The other drawback to using a vise is when you're working with larger projects like this. Now, if you put a lot of force on the vise, you can actually deform the material when you're clamping down on it. And also, there's not a lot of support in the broad area of the material, so that can actually introduce chatter into your carves. They're good for carving smaller projects, they're good for repetitive type of work, and when you definitely want your project secure. So vices, number 1, is the least used. You definitely want to use low profile vices whenever you're using them. So let's get on to number 2. The next way to hold your CNC projects on your CNC router is using something called a vacuum table. Now you can see on my Phantom here, we got this big black area. This is actually a vacuum table, and this is mat that's on the top of the vacuum table. It actually helps the vacuum work a lot better. It's a product from All-Star CNC, which I can link down in the description if you want to use it. It does hold your projects a heck of a lot better when you're using this mat. It reduces your what they call downdraft leakage by up to 80%. So it holds your project a lot more secure. A vacuum table holds a project down very tightly. As you can see, I cannot move this project. And the benefit to having a vacuum table is you can swap your projects out very quickly by just turning the vacuum on and off. Now, one of the drawbacks of using a vacuum table is they're very, very noisy. So now I've turned my vacuum on, and you can see that it's pretty overwhelming as far as the sound goes. Now, when you got your CNC router carving at the same time, that can be a lot of noise, so you definitely want to have your hearing protection on when you're using it, or you can set your vacuum pumps outside. However, for the smaller vacuum units that are on the benchtop CNC routers, the vacuum pumps are much smaller. When it comes to industrial size machines like the Phantom here, you want a good solid vacuum. Vacuum tables are very useful for production. So you take parts off, put them back on, and just constantly changing parts out. This is where vacuum tables shine. One of the drawbacks to vacuum tables is if your material is warped, you may not have a full seat. And if you don't have that, then the vacuum won't hold. So I've got a piece of pine here that is warped quite a bit. Let's check the other side. It's got quite a bit of a warp. I could probably push it down and get it to stay, but if you've got a really tight piece of wood that's just got a really big warp in it, strong wood, you probably won't be able to pull that down with the vacuums. You'll have to surface it first. But vacuums are good for production purposes, although you can find them on benchtop CNC routers. Now, one other thing about vacuum tables is even though you saw that I was pushing on that project and I couldn't move it, that's sideways force, which is what CNC routers put on. But you can almost very easily pull the project up. I'm going to demonstrate that and actually break the vacuum very quickly. This project is being held down quite good. I pull really hard, but you can almost always pull a project off the vacuum just like that. And that took almost no force whatsoever. So those are some of the pros and cons of the vacuum tables. Let's get on to the next way that you can hold your CNC project on your CNC router, and the most secure way. So we've covered a couple of hold down methods already. We got a couple more to go here, but something I want to talk to you about real quick. When it comes to creating projects on a CNC router, one of the things that we feel is most important is the project itself. And it is, because we put a lot of work into the project. But The one thing that's more important than that is the actual setup of the project. Now, hold down of your project is part of the setup. The thing with setup and why it's so important is if you forget a step during the setup, for example, you don't confirm your hold down method is nice and secure, or other things like setting your XYZ 0, we forget one of these little steps, then we have set ourselves up for failure, for having a problem with our CNC project. We may break the router bit, or the project might move, or we forget to set the XY0, which I've done many times. And that's why I've come up with this little tool that I use all the time now. It's called the CNC Project Setup Checklist. And what this does is it is basically like an airline pilot's checklist where we are confirming that our setup is right, that the project's not going to move, that we've set our XYZ0 points, and that our material sizes are what we've done in the design. This is really important. As you can see on this checklist, there are a lot of steps that we follow. We don't realize it, but these are all just little micro steps. And we do things like making sure we have material checks on here, right? Our material's the right size, the right thickness. It's been held down properly. We're using the clamping method that we have intended to use, and we've held it down nice and securely, and you've checked that. Then your router bits, making sure you've got the right router bits set up, the router bits are in good shape, and they're laid out according to the way that you're going to run your project. This setup checklist also covers the thing that we forget the most, which is setting your XYZ 0 point. This has got a lot of little information on it that as we go through the setup of our project, what we're doing is we're confirming and having a lot of confidence that the project is going to turn out exactly as you expect without those unexpected surprises. If you've been in CNC for a while, then you already know when we forget something, that project usually gets ruined. If you haven't been in CNC, you're considering getting into it, I can promise you, if you don't follow a set procedure, then you will run into a problem. Sometimes we even forget to turn our router on and hit the go button, breaks the router bit. There's something called bit slip when we don't clean the collet. There's lots of things that this thing is checking to make sure your project runs out exactly as you expect. And then of course I hit final checks. This checklist works so well for me, I have virtually no problems anymore, and so I'm making it available to you for free if you'd like to get it, which I totally recommend, and you use every time you set your project up. This is a PDF download that you can get right now. There's a link down below in this video where you can get this, start using it today, use it religiously because this works. Setup is the most important aspect of making sure that your carve turns out exactly as you want it to turn out, and this makes sure that that happens. Go down in the description, get this for free. It's yours right now. Use it today, and you'll be good to go on every project you run. All right, let's keep going. The third way, and a relatively common way that you can hold your projects to your CNC router, is by nails or screws. Now, this is the absolute most secure way that you can hold a project to your CNC router. So we're going to demonstrate real quick. I got a piece of MDF here, and when you screw your project to your spoil board, you want to create pilot holes. So we'll just make 4 quick pilot holes. Now we've got 4 holes. I've done this very quickly. And whenever you're doing this, you want to make sure you don't have the burrs on the back that you've created for your pilot holes. And then you will just screw your project right down to the table after you position it. So we'll just put 1 or 2 screws in because this is just an example. There's 1, and then here's 2. Now, one of the things I want to show you, you know about all-purpose screws, and we often drop them because they don't stay in the drill bit. So I use this brand called Velocity, and they have turned this screw deal into a science where their screws are actually fitted to their bits. So when I put that on there, that screw doesn't fall off, and then I can just pop it right off. It's not magnetic, so I can hold that there and the screw is not being pulled to it. It actually just very lightly snaps into the drill. I got tired of dropping the all-purpose screws whenever I'm using them, so this is really nice because these screws won't come out. I'll put a link to the Velocity screws down in the description of this video. They've got all kinds of screws, deck screws, outdoor screws, indoor screws. So we'll just put the second screw in. This project is fixed to the table, and I'm using screws. Now, you can use brad nails. I've seen that people do that. I've seen people nail their project down, and I've seen people use a nylon nailer. Now, you can see this in a video here where it's using nylon screws or nylon nails with a nail gun. The good thing about that is it holds your project securely, but if you run into the nail, it's not going to hurt the router bit. It's going to cut it away, as you see right in this video. The problem with using fasteners like screws and nails that are metal is you can run into them with your CNC router bit, and we don't want to do that. So whenever you're doing that, you have to take into account the area that those screws are in. Hands down, fastening it down with screws or nails is the absolute most secure way that you can hold a project down to your CNC router. Now, one of the drawbacks to using screws and nails is that you will start to tear up your spoil board just with all the holes that you're going to be creating. And when you're doing screws, it actually lifts the material up, so you have to come back in here and sand this down so the spoil board doesn't have a bump in it. So that's one of the drawbacks to having the screws. With the nylon nails, that can actually be just snapped right off. I want to get one of these nailing guns. Now, they are a little pricey like any other pneumatic nail gun, but you might want to check it out. I'll put a link for one of those down in the description as well. So we've covered vices, we've covered vacuum systems, and we've covered using fasteners to hold your project on your CNC router. Let's get on to the fourth item, which is even more common for CNC creators to hold their projects on their table. The fourth way, and very common way to hold your CNC project to your CNC router, is with the use of clamps. Now, there are three different core types of clamps that you might be using. We have top clamps, cam clamps, and toe clamps. So let's talk about each one. Top clamps are generally the most common. As you can see here, we've got 4 clamps that are holding the project down. Clamps are very secure in their own way. So with top clamps, it is, as the name suggests, holding the project from the top of the part. If you run into a clamp, a metal clamp with your CNC router bit, they just don't blend very well, and it can break your router bit very quickly. So I like wooden clamps. As a matter of fact, this clamp file is available to you if you want. I'll put a link down below. It's kind of a fun little project to make, and the benefit to have a wooden clamps, especially these made of pine, is the router bit can run right through it and it wouldn't even know it's there. It won't break your router bit. It'll ruin the clamp, and you can always make more. So I've got a file of 21 clamps that you can make. It's a good starter project. So the thing with top clamps is you have to be careful of your tool path. You don't want to run into your clamps at all possible, so you have to take that into account when you're working your design and where your tool path is going to be. So if my starting point right now, if it's at the lower left corner, I've got a clamp right in the way, and that router bit is almost certainly going to pass over or through that clamp. So clamp position is really important when you're using top clamps. Also, the tightness of the clamp, because when you're using top clamps, if you're not tight enough, as the router is moving through the material, it's actually creating a force, and it can actually move your project. So clamps need to be tight. The difference with a cam clamp as opposed to your top clamps is the cam clamp is actually clamping in from the side of the project. So one of the things that you have to do when you're using a cam clamp is you have to have some kind of hard stop for the project to clamp against, whereas with top clamps you don't. You can just clamp anywhere on the spoil board that you want. So with a cam clamp, I've got 2 fences that I've bolted down to my table, and this is what a cam clamp looks like. It's got this lobe here that is offset from the hole, so that when it spins, that lobe will move and actually come closer and closer to your project material. So I'm going to put this particular clamp in here. One of the things with cam clamps is that you generally need multiple sizes of cams on your cam clamps. If you take a look at these here, I've got 2 sizes, this one and this one, because there's only a small amount of area that this cam clamp will work in. And as we watch this, the lobe is swinging toward the project piece, and now it's applying force against the fence over here. But this is not enough to hold it because anything can knock it loose when it's cutting. So the idea of a cam is for that lobe to come past its high point when it's holding the project and then start to swing the other way. And the handle of the cam clamp will act as a lock. Now I'm going to swing this down, and this is actually pretty tight. And now there's the arrow of the clamp lobe, and we are just at the 90-degree mark. So this should actually be just a little bit past, but you can see the handle has now stopped against the material. So this clamp is not going to give way. Now the thing with cam clamps and why you need different sizes is because there's only so much travel of that lobe in the clamping area. So you not only need different size lobe clamps, you also need shim stock. So I use the shim that you'll find for drywall, shimming, what have you, and you'll have a bunch of pieces and you'll take advantage of that. So here I don't have any clamping area. My next screw hole is way over here. So this is my widest cam clamp. I've got almost a half of an inch there. So what I would do is actually take that shim stock, and I'd have it cut down so it's below the material surface, and shim it up. Make sure my part is positioned and bring that cam down. And now if you look over the top, the lobe has actually, the center of the lobe, the locking area of the lobe is just past the center line just a little bit, and the handle is now resting against there. So the forces are going around this way, but the clamp can't go any further. So cam clamps are a quick way to work. They work good when you're doing multiple projects like production type of work where you don't have to take the clamps in and out, in and out. Cam clamps work well. The drawback with them is that you have to have multiple different size lobed cam clamps, and you're going to do shimming. And you'll, like any other clamp, you'll need to hold it from all areas, and you're going to have some extra materials because you have to have a fence set up on your CNC router to make the cam clamp work. So let's talk about the third type of clamp, which is called a toe clamp. A toe clamp works similar to a cam clamp, but it's more flexible. So we have this project here. We have to have a fence when we're using a toe clamp or something to stop the project. And so I'm resting against the fence, and now we've got this little drop-in toe clamp right here. And you can see it's got a profile on the side here. The core theory of a toe clamp is it's just like your foot. You can walk and stick your toe right into the end of the project. And so now this project is held down with the toe clamp. The good thing about a toe clamp, and the big benefit with that, is it leaves a lot of clearance for your router bit. It's low profile like this one is here, kind of like a cam clamp, so you're less likely to have your router bit hit the clamp itself. And this particular one, it's actually towed in very low on the project and has a lot of space before the router bit would actually pass over it. In theory, you're not going to be over there with your router bit, but that's a toe clamp. So now we've talked about 4 ways to hold your CNC projects: a vise, vacuum system, fasteners like screws and nails, and clamps. The top clamp, the cam clamp, and the toe clamp. Say that 3 times fast. So now we're going to get on to the 5th type. Before we do that, I want to just let you know that if you are brand new to CNC routers and you are on the hunt for what bits that you need to get started, it can be pretty daunting. I know when I was in your shoes, I was trying to find a good starter set of CNC router bits, and that became pretty confusing because I really wasn't finding any answers, even from the router bit companies. So at IDC Woodcraft, we've solved that problem and put together a full-blown set of CNC router bits for the beginner. Now, this is the only truly complete CNC router bit starter set that you will find out there. It contains router bits to cover virtually any project that you design. And then I've also added projects with instructions to help get you started. Projects such as the clamps that I just showed you. This you can get as a file, so you can make your own clamps. That comes with this starter set. And then this welcome sign, which is actually my most popular project I've made, which I make available on Etsy, but it's yours free with this starter set. And then we've got other cool designs in this, like this router bit holder, a very simple project, but it's a good learning project for you. And then a couple of glass engravings, particularly this Tree of Life. This is really, really cool. It's a different way of doing projects on a CNC router. You might have thought that wood is the only thing you can do, but you can do these really cool engravings as well. If you are looking for a complete starter set and you're tired of hunting for CNC router bits, then you can get a complete set at IDC Woodcraft. I'll put a link down in the description for you so you can go take a look. The fifth way of holding your CNC project to your CNC router, in a very easy way, is a way that is my favorite, is using tape. Now there's two taping methods that is used. There's the double-sided tape and then there's the CA glue method. Now before I get into that, if you're finding this video that's helpful, then please take a moment to leave a thumbs up down below. And if I missed something in this, then maybe leave a comment down below and add your insights into different ways to hold your projects, and maybe something I missed as far as maybe a drawback or a con to one of these methods, or a pro. And what method do you prefer? Now the first thing when it comes to using the taping methods for your CNC projects is, number one, you have to have a good smooth surface on your project. So you absolutely need to sand the project first, and you have to get all that sawdust off the project. Tape doesn't work well on loose material such as sawdust. And you also need to make sure your spoil board is very clean as well. Once you get that, then you get into the tape. So we're going to cover what's called the CA glue method. This is actually my favorite, and it requires painter's tape, a scraper, some super glue, which I use a brand Starbond super glue. This is very common. There's another one, Total Boat, which I like. I'll put a link to both of them down in the description. And we need, I said, the scraper, and then you may need a utility knife for this, but these are the most important things that you have. I do want to talk to you about some of the pros and cons about using tape. Now, when we're using the CA glue method, one of them is you are using super glue. And super glue, as you know, will stick your fingers together. And so you can't use too much of it, yet you can't use too little of it. And you also have to take into account how much work you're going to be applying to your project. And what I mean by that is, if you are putting a lot of side force on it, your router is moving really quickly through the part, you've got a high feed rate, and it's putting a lot of side force on it, it can actually break the tape away. Now, getting back to the painter's tape, now we need to put the tape on the spoil board as well. And you always want to line your tape up with whatever's on the project piece. Literally just run a bead right down the middle of that tape. It doesn't, you don't want it to be too big, but you don't want it to be too small. And then simply just take your accelerator spray, lightly spray. But people ask me, does this stuff stain the wood? And no, it doesn't. So once we spray that, we can align our project over the super glue and then give it a press down. And once that super glue spreads out, that adhesive, or the accelerator, is going to activate the adhesive, and in about 5 seconds that project is very securely fastened to your table. And then when you're done, you can maybe take a scraper or something and pry it back up. So you can see I was able to pull that up. It did take some force, but so you can see that there is potential for it to come off. We're going to get into woodworking tape. So this is double-sided tape. And this is another method I like to use, although this tape is super sticky. It doesn't leave residue on your project. With woodworking tape, again, you have to have a very clean and smooth surface, so you always want to sand first, and then make sure you get all that sawdust off your project piece and off of the spoil board before you start applying tape. Now, here's the thing with double-sided tape. A lot of creators like to put the double-sided tape on the project piece and then press the project piece down. I strongly discourage that, because you want to have as much force or much adhesive of the tape on your spoil board and then get the pressure on the top. And the reason being is spoil boards are generally made of MDF, which is, like I said, sawdust. And so sawdust can break apart over time. So you want to get as much adhesion as you can. A way to get around that is by putting a very light coat of sanding sealer on your spoil board, very, very light coat, and then make sure it's cleaned off. That way you have a better contact surface. So I'm going to have to resurface my spoil board. But the way we do this is you're going to use a utility knife with a double-sided tape, apply that, and again, I'm going to find the other side of that, and we want to start with the edges, and then we'll work our way inward. Now I use the 1-inch woodworking tape. It seems to be the best for me. I recommend that. And the other thing you want to do is make sure that you are about 3 inches apart for each strip of this type of tape. You can use the 2-inch if you want to, but so we're just going to put 4 strips down, again about 3 inches apart. And from there it's very easy. All you have to do is press that tape down, and I'm putting a lot of force on it. That's why I like to use plastic scrapers. I'll link this down below in the description too. These are super cheap off of Amazon, and I use this all the time. And then just peel the backing off of each strip. And once you have that, you take the clean side of your project and you'll simply just set it down on the project, on the spoil board. Give it a good press all the way around, and your project is nice and secure. And when you're done, you can work it back up. This is actually holding a lot stronger than the CA glue. And then of course you can just peel this tape away. The drawback to using the tape method is, number one, it gets all over you. Number two, this is consumable. Once you use it, it's no good anymore. You got to throw it away and use more. But it's inexpensive. One of the other things about the double-sided tape method, it doesn't work well on very, very thin material. So you want to use material that's 1/4 inch or thicker. Every holding method has its use and where it shouldn't be used. So on very thin material, you can use the double-sided tape and clamps. You can actually do that where you want to use multiple different holding methods for different purposes. If you have a long board that's got a bit of a warp in it, you want to get clamps in the middle, but you still want to use the tape to absorb some of that vibration or whatever. As you move along, you'll figure this out. So we covered the vise, we've covered vacuum systems, and then we've covered using fasteners, nailing your projects down with either screws like the velocity screw. Again, there will be a link in the description for these because that screw stays on really nicely. It just snaps on there. You can use the nylon nailer, which I'll link in the description as well. And then we have the cam clamps, the different clamping methods. Cam clamps, you need to have multiple sizes. I don't have nearly enough sizes here, but these are no good anyway because I made them out of pine. I can break them really easy. I'll make some new ones. We have the top clamps that will clamp over the top of a project, just like that. And then we have the toe clamp, but I'll link down in the description a couple that I do like. And remember, with the cam clamp and the toe clamp, you always have to have a fence to hold your project in place. And finally, the most common method is by using tape, which is very quick, very easy. You have the woodworking tape. It's just the tape. You use a scraper and a utility knife to cut it. And then, of course, we have the CA glue method. This is a method I use very, very often as well. Again, everything's got its pros and cons, so you just want to be careful about that. Give me a thumbs up if this video was helpful, gave you some insights. Comment down below, please, and subscribe to the channel because I've got lots of videos like this that will help you with your CNC journey. I explained to you how to work with the design software, CNC routers, and of course IDC Woodcraft provides you with your CNC router bits, so make sure you drop by idcwoodcraft.com. I'm Garrett with IDC Woodcraft. Have a great day, better tomorrow, and happy CNCing. idcwoodcraft.com